Welcome everybody to this book launch of a new book which I edited. I'm Sebastian Rimestad. I am Heisenberg Fellow at the University of Leipzig, and we edited this book together with Emil Hilton-Sagau, who is now the General Secretary of the Danish Council of Churches. So he's very busy. At the moment he has a Ukrainian delegation and he has to show the Ukrainian delegation all around, so he cannot come to this book launch, unfortunately. The book is here, and I'll show it around if you want to show it around. Yes. It's a collective volume, so we have 11 chapters and an introduction, and it's about the fault lines in the Orthodox world, which is a topic that is becoming increasingly obvious, that there are fault lines in the Orthodox world. Orthodox world is conceptualized not only as the church, but as all the countries that are traditionally considered Orthodox. That's mostly in Eastern Europe. The book has 12 authors, me included. So, and they cover lots of different aspects. We have 3 sections: the section ecumenical aspects, ideological aspects, Russia and Ukraine, and the other churches. So the first we have those aspects that are about the church as a whole, as a universal church, and how it is like fissured and divided. The second one is the ideological aspects, how people use the Orthodox religious Orthodox religion, Orthodox Christianity, to divide themselves and to divide the world into different ideological and civilizational units. Russia and Ukraine is about the ongoing war in Ukraine and how that impacts the churches, or how the churches react and are impacted by that. And the other churches is a section which looks at different other churches, because the Orthodox Church is a family of churches. Basically, there are fault lines in the Orthodox world, and they have always been there. The most obvious ones are the ones that are between the national churches. The churches in the Orthodox world are not like the Catholic Church. They are not one unit, one structural unit, which is jurisdictionally centered on the Pope in Rome, but they are different territorially divided churches. So here we have a map of the churches. It's not actual, it's not current at the moment, because things are changing all the time. But you can see basically that there are the different churches which are nationally connoted, but which are officially territorial. The red ones are the Moscow Patriarchate, and the yellow one are the Constantinople Patriarchate, which are the 2 big patriarchates. The yellow one looks like it's small, but it claims to be of all the areas that are gray on this map as well, and all the rest of the world as well. So it is quite influential, also because it has a very big influence in the American society. So these national churches, there are obviously fault lines between them, which are more or less strong, more or less obvious or visible. And there are also fault lines between the nations that consider themselves Orthodox and the non-Orthodox nations, basically the rest of the world, and especially the West, which is conceived as decadent and bad and kind of like secularized. And that is the ideological part, which is the culture wars, which we have discussed here before, and which I think is quite a common subject in the recent globe, where the culture wars are important. Also, there's a lecture series about Trumpism and so on. And those are basically about Orthodox East, which considers itself as better, as superior to the decadent and secular West. And you will be talking a bit more about that when you talk about your chapter. So that's basically the fault lines that we have in the Orthodox world, and that's the fault lines we wanted to discuss in this book. The book is the result of a panel we had at the European Academy of Religion 2023, which has been then expanded to include other authors as well. Church of Stefan, Rohdewald, and others, who try to look at these fault lines and look at these divisions within the Orthodox world, not from the vantage point of the big actors, like the Patriarchate of Constantinople and the Patriarchate of Moscow, and not from the geopolitical vantage point, but more from the smaller places, where smaller areas and regions and contexts where these fault lines become visible. We have tried to gather a lot of these different contexts, but as we continued to do the work and commission the chapters and get the chapters, we realized pretty soon that it is impossible to cover all contexts, and there are lots of contexts which are very important, which we would have liked to cover, but which we couldn't. We didn't manage to. Okay. So let's just talk you through the chapters of the book. The first chapter is Dimitrios Keramidas, a Greek Orthodox theologian, who talks about the way the Orthodox Church tries to portray itself outward as a unitary church, but fails mainly because of this concept of autocephaly, which is that each church is independent. Each of these churches, or the nationally connoted churches, is independent. It's a very theological introduction, basically, to the way the Orthodox Church fails to portray its unity. Right. Katarina from the University of Helsinki is the second chapter, or the third chapter, which includes the introduction. She talks about the ecumenical movement, which is stuck, according to her, the World Council of Churches, a main actor in the ecumenical, in the institutional ecumenical movement, is stuck in the Cold War rhetoric and has not yet been able to transcend that and understand that in the post-Soviet world, this rhetoric is a very different one. So they still try to carry out ecumenical work by speaking to the leaders of the churches. And that is no longer the case in most churches, that the leaders actually have that much of a say anymore. And yeah, so he just says it's difficult. Here. Ideological aspects, we have Robert Collins, who talks about Russian Orthodox historiosophy, basically the way Russian Orthodox actors like Dugin, Alexander Dugin, and others try to portray Russian Orthodox civilization as a superior civilization. And what Collins argues there is that this discourse is not a specifically Russian Orthodox one, but is one that is adapted from Western critics of Hegel's philosophy. So Carl Schmitt is most importantly there. Stefan Rohdewald will present his chapter himself, so I will not say anything about that. Robert Saylor, an American Orthodox convert and theologian, talks about Orthodox survival courses, which is a specific genre of catechism in the Orthodox Church in America, like the Glaubenskurse in the Catholic Church, for example, and they are very conspiracy theorists. They pander to conspiracy theories and are quite anti-ecumenist, which is quite an interesting point. I forget it all the time. Russia and Ukraine, Volodymyr Bureha from Kyiv Theological Academy. So he's written this during the war in Kyiv. He writes about the way the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, that was formerly under Moscow Patriarchate, has tried to emancipate itself from the Moscow Patriarchate, and how the relations between it and the state have developed. Since the book was finished, since the manuscript was finished, the Ukrainian state has outlawed this church. So it's already history, what he writes there, but it's still a very good background for that. Paul Kolstø from Norway, from University of Oslo, has written about opposition to the war inside the Orthodox Church of Russia, which is a very bleak picture because those that oppose the war are very harshly silenced, and then they have to either leave Russia or they can, or they are put in prison or in work camps. Saname Takahashi from the University of I don't remember which university in Japan, at least. She is an anthropologist, ethnologist, and has done case study of Ukrainian and Russian Orthodox clergy in Germany, looking at how they evaluate the war and the situation as it's progressing, and showing that it's a very difficult, it's a very complex situation. It's not a very easy, clear-cut dividing line between the Russian and the Orthodox ones, or between those that are pro-war and those that are against war. There are lots of shades and differences in smaller there. And finally, the other churches is Emil Hilton-Sagau from the University of Copenhagen, or from the University of Lund in Sweden, but now in Copenhagen. He writes about the Orthodox Church in Serbia and how it has worked with the small ex-Yugoslav republics of Montenegro and Macedonia, which has changed in the last few years, certainly. These were always problems in the Serbian Orthodox Church, but this has kind of, like, there are solutions. There have come solutions now, mainly because, one, they don't want to have the Ukrainian situation, and second, the COVID pandemic organized a change in the leadership of the Orthodox Church in Serbia. Ionuț Biliuța has written about the Romanian Orthodox Church and how the Romanian Orthodox Church, which is the biggest Orthodox church outside of Russia and Ukraine, so it is basically a very important player, how it tries to navigate between the Russian church, the Ukrainian churches, and the Constantinople Church and the Serbian Church. And he has also a rather bleak outlook on how this works, because things are not working the way people in the West would like to see it, at least. That we have also seen that in the presidential elections in Romania, that people are not really Western in Romania yet, or are not Western. And finally, Hetta Hurskainen from the University of Eastern Finland in Joensuu has written about the Finnish Orthodox Church, and how the Finnish Orthodox Church used to be kind of a player between the two patriarchates, because they were part of the Constantinople Patriarchate in Istanbul, but they had very close and cordial relations with the Moscow Patriarchate, and because of the war, these relations are basically cut off, and it's a problem now to have relations with Russia. Right, that's the book, and I'm happy to answer questions and to talk more about that, but let's just first got over to Stefan Rohdewald, who writes his chapter on the Katechon, Third Rome and Holy War, Russian and Serbian worlds as eschatological geopolitical exceptionalisms, with lots of quotation marks.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's about the setting in stage of projects, of discourses which have a long history. Some of them actually found their most essentialist materialization these weeks or these months. We have a long old literature on first, second, third Rome theories. Actually, the state of the art was that it's part of official discussions in the 16th century, but it doesn't play really a role beyond of the Ulogenie of 1589, where I've found it quite prominently, of course, but then in the 19th century it's a reinvented tradition, when Danilevsky is working on globality, Russia in a global world, it's a secular approach to church history, which is useful to define civilization, culture, and the Slavic Greek world. In the Second World War, there is actually, well, there's this march music, the Holy War, but there's no patriarch who says this is a holy war. Actually, it's a secular approach to the religious contamination of warfare by Stalin. And only now we have a patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church who actually says this is a holy war. This was never the case before. Not in the early modern period, not in the Middle Ages anyway. Only since 2023, after Easter, no, 2024, a year ago, only with Easter 2004, we have this situation. The same with Third Rome. This did never really play a role. Until now, we have large amounts of sources and of official sources put in 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, said, well, we are the Third Rome. As if this would have been necessary, but this is now the last nail in the coffin. He claims actually affirmatively, yes, we are the Third Rome. This has never been the case earlier. Not Stalin, no patriarch ever claimed that Russia is the Third Rome. This is a totally new situation from this point of view. I came to the topic when I was invited to contribute to the third phase of the Sonderforschungsbereich, special research area, global conditions. I thought about the Russian world, Serbian world. Well, this has a history in the 19th century. I tried to integrate it. This was a secular discourse. The emigration plays a role when it's about the sacralization of the nation. Berdyaev plays a role for the Russian discourse. The Russian emigration to Belgrade is important for Serbian discourses. And after the 1980s, these texts are republished and play a role in the Yugoslav wars and recently in the Russian-Ukrainian war. Or since the 1990s in the text by Dugin. These are textbooks on geopolitics which are quite chaotic, but have been used as textbooks at the military academy in Moscow since the late 1990s. The officers waging war now were at this academy, I guess. So this is a new generation which knows what people like Dugin want, and they use these textbooks for their own agenda. So it's a reenactment of old fragments in a density which I never hoped to witness. This was not my aim when I had this project for the special research area, but it's materialized week after week or month after month. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy to some degree. It never would have been necessary, or there's no determinologist approach which can explain this. But if this applies for the Russian case, then the Serbian case is more interesting because there the Serbian world has as long history as the Russian world in the 19th century. It's interwoven. The genesis of this idea is close to the Russian discourse in the 19th century. It has been reinvented by the Interior Ministry, Vulin, and one of the presidents of Bosnia-Herzegovina, Dodik. These are the most prominent officials using the discourse, but not Vucic, for example, who is managing to play a European card and a Russian card at the same time. The Serbian world actually is prominently part of the Russian world. This is the state of the art at the moment. people in Serbia working with the context sooner or later see themselves as part of the Russian world. Nevertheless, the Katechon, which I did not mention yet, which has been introduced also a year ago in this speech by Patriarch Kirill declaring holy war and declaring Russia as the Katechon, refraining the rest of the world and playing the role to prohibit the Antichrist to be victorious. This discourse has been quoted in official media of the Serbian Orthodox Church. So this is not only on the websites of fringe, marginal conspiracy publications, which are many, but also on official sites in Serbia. Not on the first glance visible, but if you look for it, you find it. This seemingly self-fulfilling prophecy has not yet been fulfilled in the Serbian case. It is still an experiment, somehow an attempt to see what works, what doesn't work, and it's much more an interesting situation as Vučić, the the president of Serbia, is maneuvering between the settings, looking for European contributions, financial support, and for nevertheless strengthening the ties to a Russian Orthodox moral discursive situation. So my contribution was not necessarily on official church context, but was larger, looking to networks, also secular networks, portals, web portals, or history of ideas from a more traditional point of view, or discourses which are in the flow or flowing. Maybe as much.
Thank you very much. Yes, we have two comments as well. One by Katarina Ristić from the University of Leipzig, working on communication studies, right? Something like that?
No, but...
Okay. You'll introduce yourself then. Definitely. And the other by Makrides, Vasilios Makrides, professor of Eastern Christian Cultural History at the University of Erfurt. So please, I'll get...
Oh.
Or do you want to start?
Ladies first.
Ladies first, okay.
Okay.
Please.
Okay, then I will start. I actually thought that's fine. Everyone said 10 minutes per presentation, and as you see, we are almost 40 minutes late. So I will really make it very quick.
We're only 25 minutes. So.
Okay, I read the book with great... how should I put it, satisfaction. On one hand, while it is really speaking to a very current topic and a very important topic in a current political moment, and at the same time, it really provides a longer kind of historical view of the topics that it addresses without necessarily very... oberflächig or very kind of superficial dealing with the main concepts and problems it is dealing with, and this was really refreshing. So I highly recommend it as a great introduction into the question of how Orthodoxy works or doesn't work, or what are the problems and challenges in how it addressed current geopolitical moment. Actually, since this is church and religion is not really my area of research, I actually work on Southeastern Europe, transitional justice, media, and memory. So I read the book Against the Literature on Wars in Former Yugoslavia and Religion, and how and what was the role of religion there, and how that changed, or what are similarities from the text as I read them. That was one aspect that I was looking at. And the second aspect that was interesting for me was, or perhaps because of this colloquium being dedicated to imperial spatial formats, I was thinking about your introduction primarily, but also many other texts which are looking at this specific structure or organization of Orthodox churches, this autocephaly, as historically kind of developing, historically developing structure which is somehow prominent or characteristic of Orthodox churches, and it is perceived as a kind of problem. That's how it is framed. And then I would just quote, you say in the introduction, it is understood as conundrum of mutual distrust and competition. And throughout the number of texts, I will now not go one by another, the idea is that this kind of structure, this actually equality, or the way that power is equally divided between different patriarchs, how this translates into fragmentations, into problems, into competitions, into divisions, and so on. And in a beautiful overview that you two give in the introduction, which follows this story and development kind of in last 2000 years also, you connect this with imperial spatial order. You say, unlike Protestant and Catholic Church, Orthodox Church in Russia primarily is connected with this imperial order, hence becoming imperial itself, hence translating in this kind of, that is the argument, that how I understood it. And then I was wondering two things. On one hand, how that relates in, I would assume, non-imperial Roman Catholic Church order. So, but comparing, how would you do this comparison? What would then come out of it? That is one. And the second question would be how that explains or not the whole of, or to put it another way, it seems to me more relevant or plausible to actually say that it is not imperial order which is perpetuated here, but rather nationalist fragmentation, which is going into these ethno-nationalist divisions. And as you see, this is how the map looks like. And number of texts in the edited volume are looking at these problems which are appearing exactly because of these different ethnic groups and different church jurisdictions claiming jurisdiction over power over particular territory. So most obviously, of course, Ukraine and Russian patriarchy, but you also have the same in Romania. There is a beautiful text about that too, about Bessarabia, and then problems or clashes between Russian and Romanian church, or Macedonia and Macedonia that you already mentioned, which is also addressed in another text. So this is perceived as an extremely important element, which is interpreted within this imperial order. That would be my first kind of question. The second topic is this question of relation between religion and conflict. And most of the literature on former Yugoslavia or conflicts in the Yugoslav wars would actually say that those conflicts were neither religious nor ethnic, but national mobilization which used religion as a hallmark of national identity. So you have actually religionization of politics rather than the other way around. And there we have, I'm thinking about Mitja Velikonya or Vjekoslav Perica, and they would both claim that what we have is Orthodox Church, which is working as a first mobilizer, national mobilizer. And this is actually not the case, at least from how I read the chapters in the book, because what we see is alliance and agreement and silence of Orthodox Church in Russia, but they are agreeing with what is already formulated in Putin's Russian world as a general kind of geopolitical goal. So it seems to me that who is leading this kind of discourse is different in the current case, and that this difference might be very productive for further investigating what is happening and how those relations and constellations actually work. And the third topic, and there I will then, that would be the last thing that I want to say, is I read the book a lot through current far-right research, because that is my current research topic. And basically I was looking for elements within those articles and how they relate to this. And although this is not directly addressed by, okay, maybe you can say that you do address this kind of, you, Stefan, do address this, especially in the context of ideologies. Collins also, okay, so there are several articles which do look at this element. I was struck by how much of different elements of what we see as a current rise of far-right actually emerges in this text, although it is not in the focus of the research, which I find very interesting. So, for example, number of texts is looking at this kind of new emerging alternative media scene, both in a sense of alternative media, and you have in Russia this Tsargrad TV, Tsargrad TV, and then the whole set of similar kind of alternative media in Macedonia, in Montenegro, in Romania, where we have pro-Russian bishop. I'm not sure what is his official rank, who is propagating this pro-Russian position in social media, but also at alternative TV media and in Romanian. And this far-right learning there Gramsci, right? This is the idea of Gramsci and turn in far-right. This you can see how it operates by, on one hand, creating this kind of alternative media and then feeding the discourse through what you have as a Dugin's kind of fourth way, fourth path on this Euro-Asianism, response to this kind of apocalyptic end of the times narrative, which is feeding into far-right fears of end of the times, and then the need to respond extremely and radically to respond to this, opening this kind of Eastern, let's say, branch of transnational or even global far-right. And as much as number of texts is working with this ideological conundrums of far-right, I actually missed one very important author who was not mentioned at all. I have a book here, and he's currently making a huge career. He's dead, but his work is making a huge career in transnational far-right, becoming the dark intellectual of Eastern far-right. And his name is Dragoš Kalajić. He is a Serbian fascist who was student of Evola in 70s, and in 80s and 90s, during the wars in former Yugoslavia, he connected with Russians, with Dugin, and basically wrote a book, Uprising of Russia, in 94. Today, this book is seen as a prophetic writing of someone who saw that the only way for saving civilization is that Russian Orthodoxy actually rise out of the position in which it was in the 90s, and to show the right path, so to say. In Russian Center in Belgrade, which you also mentioned in the text, there was a huge promotion of his book. There is a planned translation, publication of all of his works. And he is someone who is set in both Serbian and Russian intellectual milieu now as someone who was profiting this new path of Russia. And why this is important here is because he is offering alternative ideological position. He's saying, no, Dugin is completely wrong. Eurasia, that is nothing. Russia and Orthodoxy, this is true European identity. There is no deviation. We are not moving from the West. This is exactly what Europe is supposed to be traditionally, on identity and so on. And he is directly building on conservative, so-called far-right after the Second World War, and connecting this kind of the whole broader intellectual conservative milieu with the current far-right. To conclude, the book is brilliant, and I don't say this lightly because edited volumes and different text chapters are always a little bit challenged to read, but it is well structured, it is well written, and it is also accessible for someone like me who is not deeply in the topic, and it provides much more than what is offered or what is announced in the title, which is, I think, well, the best recommendation I can give. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will just respond to your first point, because the imperial order and the national order, that's the problem that already the theologian Alexander Schmemann, who was in America, he noted that the problem with the Orthodox Church is that it has layers. It has this universal layer of Christianity, then it has the imperial layer on top of that, which is then Russian Empire or Ottoman Empire, or the Roman Empire if you want, and then you have the national layer on top of that, and this national layer kind of clashes with the imperial layer. That's the big problem, that those two layers clash, and that's exactly what you said. So I hope that kind of answers a little bit that question. Thank you, and we move on to Professor Makrides.
So thank you for the invitation. Just to say a few things about this very, I would say, also fascinating book, in the sense that we had in the last 35 years after the change of the radical changes in Eastern and Southeastern Europe, we had an explosion of interest in the Orthodox. In the 90s, it was because of the Yugoslav wars, and later on, I'm in Erfurt since 1998, it's a long time, but there is an exponential growth of studies devoted to different aspects of the Orthodox world, also from an interdisciplinary perspective, which is also evident in this volume, meaning there are theologians, historians, social scientists, political scientists, and others who they show, let's say, an unprecedented interest in this religious factor that shapes also the history and also the developments in Eastern and Southeastern Europe. So there is a lot going on in this domain, but still the books that are published, they always fill a gap, and I think this is one of these cases. Of course, you write in the introduction that we could not cover everything, but there is no book that covers everything, so there is always work for future scholars and also to consider a few things. But let's say it is actually a realistic statement to say that it fills a gap in the research, also in the comparative perspective. I could speak perhaps about the book for an hour or so, but I will limit myself to a couple of points. The first one that I would like to mention, it is evident in many, perhaps not in all, but in many of these chapters, is the idea of space. So there has been this spatial turn in cultural and social sciences, meaning that spaces are not only the physical environment, but also they are shaped also by the social interactions of the people that are there. But there is also a specific connection, let's say, with the Orthodox world, in the sense that there is so many ideas that connect to the space, like the so-called canonical territory of one church, which is a kind of a sacred territory that nobody can enter via ein Naturschutzgebiet, how to put it in English. there is also, let's say, the sacrality that has a long history, meaning that people of another confession, they should not do any work there. But there are many other concepts related to this, like the concept of the territorialization or the deterritorialization, meaning the ideal church should have something like a jurisdiction or space, a specific space, or it is a spiritual entity beyond this spatial arrangement. So this is a central point, I think, and also it connects also with this, what we call geopolitics. So geopolitics are shaped also by geography, by this particular position of a church, of an actor within a specific, let's say, geographical unit. But also it has also further dimensions that connect, like these Eurasian ideas or the East-West dimension and so on. So this is a topic, I think, that it's very evident in many of the chapters of the book, and I find it is quite interesting. There is also a theology of the space, an Orthodox theology of the space, like a Protestant one or a Catholic one, and so on. So this has a lot of implications, and I think they come nicely in the book. Let's say also the relation between religious and secular conceptions of the space. Meaning when we have the foundation of the nation states, the churches were also integrated within the states. They became, let's say, instrumentalized within this context, but they also tried to protect the national boundaries in one way or another, or at least to expand with the religious nationalism, which happened with many Orthodox churches. So we have, I think, this is an important point that is also appears in many chapters of the book. A second point that I would like to make is about these fault lines, what exists in the title. And there are many, as it has already been mentioned. These fault lines, I mean, this is not quite evident many times in the book, but what we consider as a problem, as a source of conflict in the Orthodox world, let's say the issue of nationalization. Why do we have, let's say, up to the 19th century, we have 5 Orthodox churches, including the Russian one, and now we have, let's say, 3 times more. So if you count also the Macedonian, North Macedonian, the Archbishop of Ohrid, we're about 16, including also the new Ukrainian. So we have from 5 to 16, it's a multiplication within, let's say, 2 centuries, and probably some others will come in the near future. So the question is how to explain this. And of course, it is not clear in this book. I think this is some issues that, these are some issues that need to be addressed more, let's say, over the long durée to understand how this happens. And we have a lot of condemnations of the so-called religious ecclesiastical nationalism. I mean, they say always, oh, it's a bad thing, and so on, so on, so on. But actually, de facto, it exists. So in a way, this is a kind of a conundrum again. In a way, it is a break with the past, because the Christian history, let's say the Christian church was initially a universal one. Okay, it wanted to transcend boundaries, not to create new ones. So there is a, let's say, discontinuity with the past. On the other hand, it is not perceived as such. That's the paradox of the whole story. I mean, you see that some say there is, so to say, they pay lip service to this and they condemn something, but at the same time they do the opposite. So it is a kind of particular situation. So we have to understand these processes, and it comes perhaps in the first chapter more clearly with the issue of autocephaly. Without going into details, of course, meaning that on the one hand there is a rupture, there is a break, but at the same time there is also continuity. Let's say the Orthodox past itself unwillingly prepares the way for this nationalization. So it comes, I mean, the autocephaly, when it started to be implemented, it was not a nationalist project, but actually it created a background, and when the nationalism came, it was transformed immediately into the national project. So this may explain this kind of a paradox that we observe in most Orthodox churches. And the third point, and I close with this, is what comes evident also in Stefan's chapter and in many other chapters, also in Collins's and so on, in different ways, because he discusses discourses and so on, is this notorious issue of the anti-Westernism, the Orthodox anti-Westernism, which has a long, long history. And of course, there are many attempts now somehow to overcome it, but it still lingers on and plays a much vital role, I would say, in many unforeseen and unexpected connections. Okay, so it's a huge topic. I'm not going to say much about it, just only one particular, which is quite unforeseen. We have a few months this new administration of Donald Trump. Okay, so there is an anti-Westernism coming from this, a critic of the Western modern project from the Trump administration, as you know, which has been received positively by the Orthodox. This is a kind of a paradox again. The Archbishop, the Greek Archbishop of America, Elpidophoros, based in New York, he compared Trump officially, he offered him a cross with some precious jewelry and so on, and he compared him as a new Constantine. I mean, it was amazing. He called him the new Constantine, and he wished him victory. I mean, alluding, of course, to the vision that Constantine had, this Milvia Bridge battle in 312. He was alluding to this, but it is amazing that he compared him with Emperor Constantine the Great, the so-called Great, and of course Trump accepted without. But if you see we don't know exactly the background, but the question is how can he do something like this? But in any case, Trump appears in a way to support these traditional values that the Russian Orthodox Church and Russian Federation also supports. That's why I think it was around the end of March, Sergei Lavrov, in an interview, he said, finally, someone came from the other side of, let's say, from the Western world, who actually has a motivation, Christian motivation, how we share some Christian values. This is what he said in it. You can find it in the web. So you see that there is also anti-Westernism from within the West. And of course, there are some other anti-Western, including the Orthodox one, and sometimes there are some overlappings. So I think this is, there are many examples that come out of this book, which point to this phenomenon, which I think will have an important role to play in the future. So these were my remarks.
Thank you. Please, you can react.
If I'm thinking to compare the Russian, the Serbian development of these discourses, I would see the interwar period as the difference. In Serbia, the Svietosavlja evolved. The theological students of theology were involved in modern ideology writing. This never happened with Russian clergy. They are only now in this situation, and the Russian clergy was rather conservative until the end of the 1990s, maybe. Secular writers, Berdyaev in the Emigration, sacralized the nation, but not theological writers sacralizing the nation. They were on the fringes, and they have become maybe pushed in these situations in the last 20 years, or this is a new situation, I would say. Whereas in the Serbian church, in the interwar period, there were various bishops actively involved. Nikolai Velimirovic, the archbishop in Ohrid, which is important and eminently important today, also in Russia, but also for this Macedonian-Serbian situation. There were no such bishops in the Russian Orthodox Church until recently, I would say. And Christian nationalism, this is the other context, of course. We have to integrate what is going on. Although these are claimed exceptionalisms, Russia is part of a global situation, and Trump, of course, illiberal, anti-modernist modernism is part of the problem. You can also look to India. Hinduism is seen in a totally different way now than 30 years ago. This is part of this global situation. Imperial, it is when all the contexts are reenacted, and it turns trans-imperial, as we all know, or we should discuss probably. All the histories are remade then, not necessarily really imperial, but potentially really imperial. And Christian nationalism or Christian imperialism then plays a prominent role, it seems.
Thank you. We are at the end of today, and I thank you very much for coming, and I thank you for your questions, and I thank the panelists for coming as well, and for joining us and discussing and having such nice words for the book. That's very nice. Thank you. Thank you very much.